Welcome to Resi Studio. In this video, I will cover my approach in having a third-person character controller using Cinemachine Virtual Camera with mobile input. So before jumping in and explaining how this script works, I'm gonna lay it out what do I have in this Video Unity project. In the hierarchy, I have a game object called Player with Virtual Camera. This game object holds some basic components like the animator, capsule collider, rigid body, sorry. It holds the player controller script that is holding reference for the mobile input X and Y value in order to move my character and to move my camera. I also have reference for a game object called camera target object. This is a game object that the Cinemachine Virtual Camera uses to target it, but it also is the one that will allow me to rotate my player when I rotate my camera. So I have also the player input component that will allow me to use the new input system from Unity. So this will allow me to control my player with gamepad, keyboard, if I switch between mobile input and the new input system. For the move, I have the action type value to vector and control type vector 2. So I'm using to move the left stick with a gamepad when using the WASD keyboard. For the look, mostly the same action type and control type. I use the right stick of the gamepad and my mouse for look when I'm controlling the camera. For the run, it's just an action type of button that will be using the left trigger of my gamepad and the left shift of the keyboard. Back to the hierarchy, I have a game object called Virtual Camera UI. I have two different canvases. One of them is called UI Standard. It is holding two type of buttons to make the effects that I'm turning on and off the mobile input. For this canvas to work, the sort order must be at 1. So if by any chance I'm gonna add more inputs for my mobile input, I need to put this at sort of 1 and the UI mobile has to have a sort of 0. So for my UI mobile canvases, I have all the necessary components with the necessary script in order to create the X and Y value on my mobile input. First up, we have the look touch panel. It's a UI panel which the transparency is way at 0, so as you can see, it covers the whole screen. This look touch panel have a script called UI touch panel that is gonna to create the necessary X and Y value in order for me to control the camera. And I have a joystick container that is actually a UI image component. Same as the panel, the transparency is back at 0, as you can see in the corner. But there you go. I'm gonna leave it there so you can see it. So he has the script called your virtual joysticks, the one that is gonna create the X and Y value to move my player. So inside the joystick container, I have a small joystick handler here that, depending on where you touch here on the image, he will move to the touch position. So you may be wondering that since we're using the new input system, why are we making our own virtual joystick and not use the on-screen stick script that the new input system provided us with? The reason is that this type of joystick, you need to press in the center of the joystick in order to make it work. Now, it works fine for a basic prototype, but I feel that from a gamer perspective, it's not very comfortable, as when you're trying to build a joystick, you have to be aware of the different sizes of different devices, and having this type of joystick is feel very uncomfortable if you're trying to play it in a gamepad. I have seen it. I don't like this type of joystick. That is why it is for this approach, for this little project, I decided to recreate a virtual camera that, so regardless of where you touch on the image, the joystick will know and give us the necessary value to control our player. So that's a little explanation of why I did not want to use the on-screen stick script. So more or less now we know we have the joystick container for to recreate the virtual joystick. I have like a small button. It's not a UI button per se, it's a image that I have the on-screen button script provided with the new input system, and for the control paths, same as my input actions that I show you at the beginning of this video, I have it to the left trigger, and this will activate the run action up regardless if I'm using the mobile input or not. Now that we have a little more understanding of what we have in the project, let us go see the script step by step. Oh, I forgot about the player virtual camera game object. I have the virtual camera inside my game object. I'm using the virtual camera, which allows to move my camera the way I want it to. I'm in the body section, I'm using third person follow. So in the Y and X value, I can move it accordingly as to my liking, as if I want it in the center or not. So for this little project, I'm using the virtual camera. As you can see here, I have the camera target. It's the one the Cinemachine Virtual Camera has as to follow and to look at. Here it is. It's just a simple game object inside my player. So you can see it right around here. So you can place it as you want, just put it in the center of the chest of my model here. So let us jump into the player script and explain how everything works. So inside the player controller script, I have the necessary variables in order to make everything work inside the start. I'm calling the necessary components here. So let us go method by method here. On the update method, I have the input from device and the camera rotation, calling it frame by frame. So input from device, which is here, it is the method that I created in order to tell my player where he's gonna get the inputs. Either I'm gonna get the inputs from my virtual joystick or my touch panel that I showed you before, or I'm getting my inputs from the new input system, either by a gamepad, keyboard, etc. So here I have a Boolean method that is returning a true or false if the player is running. Since I'm using the new input system and the buttons, they have a value of a float of 0 or 1. I have made this quick calculation in order to determine that if I'm pressing the button, if it's 1, it is constantly turning to true, but if it's not being pressed, then it's going to turn back to 0, which is false, and this is how I determine if my player is running or not. So let us have a quick look at the camera rotation method here in the camera section. Here I'm making the necessary calculations to control my camera rotations, the X and Y value. Since I'm using the virtual camera, very different from the free look camera, on the virtual camera I need to determine at what points I need to stop when it's rotating in the Y value. So in this section here, I'm giving him a minimum value and a max value in which he can in a way turn the camera up and down. Here in the fixed update, I have a method called movement. I have my movement method inside the fixed update since I'm using the rigid body. When you're using physics in Unity, you need to place it inside the fixed update. Here I'm making the necessary calculation in order to move my player. Here I will determine the speed of my animation, the speed of my player. Here inside, I'm going to rotate my player according to the camera. Now that we have a quick idea of what the player controller script is doing, we're gonna jump in right now and see how the virtual joystick works. So here we are inside the joystick container. So the virtual joystick script is using the Unity engine event system that allow us to use the events called I pointer down handler, the I pointer up handler, and the I drag handler. Same as the player, I have the necessary variables here on top to make everything work. Now, once I press on the image, I am calling the on pointer down, which is the method that right here. This will create the necessary event data that this data, the on pointer down event data, I'm gonna pass it through on the undrag event. And this undrag event is being called every time I drag my finger in this image around the container. Now, once I press, using this line here, rect transform utility screen point to local point in rectangular, I'm calculating the position and then I'm gonna output it using the touch position variable here on the vector. And this touch position will allow me to determine the value I'm going to recreate in the X and Y value. Now these two lines around here are the most important one. Once I have the necessary output position, I'm going to pass this with the apply size delta method here. That will determine the distance between where did I touch inside this image container versus the distance in the center of the pivot. This will allow me to have a float value, either a decimal value or a whole value. The second line on the output position, which apply the inversion filter, all it does is allow me to know if the value that I'm going to be giving to my player is a positive value or a negative value. The third line, which is the clamp position, is to make my handler move according to my position where I press around the container. So let me play it here so you can see it in action. So these two lines around here is being called every time I touch or press inside the container, and in order to make my joystick handler move according to where I'm being dragged or pressed inside the container, is done by this line around here. Once I have the necessary calculation, I pass this to my output vector method here, which is on top around here, place it inside a vector variable called player vector output, and then make this public vector2 method in order to return it. This is the one, the vector output, that are being called in my player's script here. Let me say here, my device input, here you go. This is one being called here. Now that you guys have an idea of my approach on the virtual joystick, I'm gonna show you my approach for the touch panel in order to control the look of the camera and his rotation. So more or less, I am using the same event system that I use in the virtual joystick, but I'm also using the legacy touch input. More on it later on. So once I touch the panel, this method, a unpointed down method, is being called, and as the same, I'm gonna pass this data to the undrag, but I'm also gonna store the pointer ID on this int variable, and this int variable I'm gonna add it to my touch finger ID. Now this data is gonna be passed in the undrag, so every time I drag my finger across the screen to move my camera, this is gonna be updated, and I'm gonna output my value here. I'm gonna share it with my player script. The reason I'm using the legacy input is that I want to make sure that the only finger that the camera actually listens to will be the one pressing this panel. So by checking if there's only one or two fingers in my mobile device, but I'm checking if the finger that's touching a panel has a specific ID by having this ID that only you can acquire if you press this panel, I make sure that every time I move my finger, this output is being called. And once I stop moving my finger, then the output is 0. And once I start dragging my finger again, then I'm gonna keep moving on. Let me have a little reminder that when you're using canvases for the mobile input and you're using a panel for to control the camera or the look of the camera, just make sure that this panel is always on top and the joystick container on the bottom. If I increase the transparency of my panel, I have this all here around here to control the camera, but if this touch panel is below the joystick container, I'm gonna lose access to the joystick. More or less as a layer order, always have the look touch input panel on top of the joystick container. So this is a more or less my personal approach to have a third-person character controller using virtual camera Cinemachines on mobile. Again, I studied the starter asset pack from Unity. So if you want to have a look and see any stuff that I might have missed, so let me know. But this is my approach. The link project is in the description below. I'm also working the same method for the free look camera, so that part 2 of the video is coming out very soon. So once again, thank you for hearing me out. Until next one, have a lovely day.